Alright, I'm not usually a fan of RGB stuff, but this is actually pretty tight. Howdy guys, Ponchato here, and today we'll be taking a look at a liquid AIO CPU cooler from Deepcool, the Gamerstorm Castle 240 RGB. Thanks to Deepcool for sending this over, and let's get started. The Castle 240 RGB was just released in July of 2018 for $110 US. It's compatible with LGA 1151, AM4, and TR4 sockets. For some reason, Deepcool rates it for a 165 watt TDP on Intel chips, but a 250 watt TDP on AMD processors, maybe due to the different mounting standards for their respective sockets. First, I just want to talk about the LEDs. Most RGB products I see are kinda meh, usually because the LEDs aren't very bright or aren't very colorful. That is absolutely not so with the Castle 240. These are by far the brightest and most saturated LEDs I've ever seen in or around a computer. Very few products make me say wow, but the first time I saw the LEDs on this, I was impressed. While we're at it, let's look at the pump. This thing looks weird when it's not on, mostly because it's so strangely tall. But as soon as you boot up your PC, you can see why they made it that way. The LEDs in the pump aren't just resting on top, they're set about halfway down behind the Gamerstorm logo for a kind of infinity mirror effect. It's a very cool look. Now there are two ways to control the LEDs. The first is with a motherboard RGB header, for which the Castle 240 comes with two different style adapters, and the second is the included inline controller. It's about as simple to operate as can be. The plus and minus buttons move through the lighting modes, and the center button cycles through the 5 speeds and turns the LEDs on or off when held for 3 seconds. Being hardwired, you'll need to either find a way to stick it outside the case or deal with opening the side panel every time you want to change it. The motherboard RGB header will be much more convenient in that regard. Strangely, Deepcool only provided a 4-way rather than 5-way splitter for the RGB connection, so if you run a second set of RGB fans in push-pull, you'll need to hook up the pump LEDs to their own motherboard header. The base of the pump is a smoothly finished copper plate. Not a mirror finish, but no machining marks either. The coolant tubes can be rotated almost 180 degrees from the base of the pump, so they can accommodate any orientation you choose. The radiator is pretty typical for a 240mm model. All black, threaded mounting holes on both sides, and sleeved coolant tubes. One thing that always bothers me about AIOs is the gaps between the fans and the radiator, which let some air blow out the sides rather than forcing it all through the radiator fins. If the fans were tightly sealed to the radiator, it would improve the efficiency and maybe dramatically reduce temperatures, especially at low RPM. The 120mm fans, a slight variation of Deepcool's CF120, come with gray vibration damping rubber pads on the corners. They're rated for 500 to 1800 RPM and have a hydro bearing, which is probably just a variation of a fluid dynamic bearing. The LEDs are hub mounted and the blades are translucent, giving them a nice even glow. Deepcool also included a 4-way PWM splitter, so you can run both fans or all 4 fans in a push-pull setup off of one motherboard fan header. There's also a 16-inch PWM extension cable, and they give you a double-sided adhesive strip, so you can stick the splitter anywhere in your case, though I just opted to shove it all under the radiator. Installation is very simple. On my AM4 test bench, it started with threading the double-sided mounting bolts into the stock backplate. Next, the AM4 brackets get screwed into the bottom of the pump. A little hard to line up, but overall not too difficult. After that, you put down a dab of the included thermal grease in the center of the processor. Side note here, maybe I got a small tube, but there was only enough thermal paste for a single application. As long as you never make mistakes though, that won't be an issue. Make sure you take the protective sticker off the cold plate on the pump, then set it down on the processor. Finally, you thread the 4 mounting nuts onto the exposed mounting bolts to clamp it to the CPU. Next is the radiator installation. First you mount the fans. Just slide the long screws through the fan mounting holes and into the threaded holes on the radiator. Next you mount all that to the case using the shorter screws. With this configuration, the Castle 240 is really meant to be an exhaust fan rather than intake. If the screws were just a few millimeters longer to accommodate the thickness of a typical case, you could use the Castle 240 as a proper front-mounted intake with the fans pushing air through the radiator rather than pulling. That said, for the best look in a windowed case without a top mounting location like this one, you can install it like this, with the radiator exhausting out the front. Unorthodox, sure, but it does look cool. Finally, for wiring, the fan headers plug into the 4-way splitter, and the splitter then plugs into your motherboard. The LED leads plug into a splitter cable, which can then be connected to an RGB header on your motherboard or to the inline controller. If you go the controller route, you'll need to plug the controller's power cable into a SATA power jack. Once all the cables are tidied up, this is a pretty sweet setup. Now let's get to the benchmarks. My test bench is a Ryzen 3 1200 overclocked to 4.1 GHz at 1.35 volts. The graphics card is a passively cool GT1030 from MSI, and thanks to ViewSonic for the 850 watt Focus Plus power supply. Both the graphics card and power supply can run fanless, meaning the only sound coming from the system is from the CPU cooler itself. Load temperatures are taken with the CPU running Prime 95, and cooling results are reported as deltas, degrees above ambient temperature. First, we'll look at the idle results. These are the noise levels and temperature deltas with no programs running and the fans at their minimum RPM. One issue I have here is the pump noise. It's not loud by any means, but in a very quiet room with the fans barely spinning, the pump is audible. I think a large part of that is due to its roughly 2600 RPM operating speed. Anything spinning that fast is going to produce some noise, and if Deepcool could figure out a lower RPM pump, they could become the new king of AIOs. Next, we'll take a look at the RPM versus PWM graph to show the granularity of control you can achieve with the fans. These results are fairly typical, with any PWM setting in the bottom roughly 20% running at minimum RPM. The rest of the fan curve is very close to linear and shouldn't present any problems. Now here's the delta C versus RPM graph to show whether the cooler is limited by airflow or by heat transfer. A leveling off at higher RPM indicates the cooler is limited by heat transfer, while a consistent drop in delta indicates airflow is the limiting factor. For the most part, tower coolers and AIOs are limited by heat transfer, while top-down and low-profile coolers are limited by airflow. Based on these results, I think the Castle 240 is being held back mostly by the processor's heat spreader. It's only so efficient at transferring heat from the CPU to the cooler. In other words, at least on a relatively low power chip like the 1200, adding a second set of fans in push-pull probably won't make much difference in the delta at higher fan speeds. Now here's the most important graph for performance, temperature delta versus noise. This answers the question, how loud is it and how well does it cool? The Castle 240 brings an impressive show here, equal or better temperature performance than every high-end cooler I've tested except for one. CryoRig's A40 Ultimate can hit about 3 degrees lower, but the Castle 240 has a pretty major advantage. The A40's minimum noise level is over 33 decibels, whereas the Castle 240 can reach 30. A 3 decibel difference doesn't sound like much, but under very quiet conditions that could make or break an extremely quiet build. Now we'll look at the load results. These measurements are taken with Prime 95 running and the fans at full speed to show the cooler's upper limits. The Castle 240 lands almost at the top, beating out every cooler except the A40 in temperature, but leading the A40 in noise by more than 4 decibels. The main driver of the noise here is the fact that the Castle 240 has 2 fans. Most of these coolers only have 1. It will be interesting to see how it stacks up against dual fan tower coolers in future reviews. Hint, hint. Now here's the chart of cooler scores, a combined rating of temperature and noise. You can think of this as a metric to compare coolers running at their optimal speed, balanced between cooling performance and noise level. Owing to its exceptional noise and temperature performance, especially at low fan speeds, the Castle 240 is the new king. Even at the minimum fan speed, it can keep my Ryzen 3 1200 under 70 degrees while only producing 30 decibels of noise. That is really impressive performance, and it means that even under load, the Castle 240 can run nearly silent, basically inaudible if your GPU has a fan or if you have even a single hard drive in your case. Finally, cooler score per dollar to show price to performance. Unsurprisingly, the Castle 240 falls behind here. It's a high-end cooler with pretty significant features unrelated to performance, and AIOs have always been relatively expensive. But the Castle 240 isn't designed to be a budget competitor. It's designed to be a cooling beast with crazy LEDs, and it is exactly that. The Castle 240 is a top-tier cooler all around. The LEDs are brilliant, bright, and beautiful, the installation process is nearly perfect, and the cooling and noise performance are right up there with the best I've tested. It's a highly capable cooler that can handle the super high-end Core i9 CPUs from Intel and Threadrippers from AMD, and look really good while doing it. If you're looking to upgrade to water cooling and add some very intense RGB light to your build, the Deepcool Castle 240 RGB takes my top recommendation. Follow the link in the description to pick one up for yourself. Hit subscribe and click the bell icon to get notified of new videos as soon as they're up. So guys, if you like this video, hit the like button. If you want to see more, hit subscribe. And if you have any questions on the Castle 240, leave them in the comments below. Thanks for watching. I hope I helped, and I'll see you in the next video.